Hello, and thank you for joining me. My name is Mel Butcher. I have a background in engineering and I do training and consulting work now to organizations on things like leadership and engagement. So, today I want to talk just really briefly about some indicators that I think will show leaders like you why a focus on retention and employee engagement is critical, and it's going to become even more important in the coming decades. So, I'm going to bring my screen up here really quickly and let's have a chat about it. Okay, so why retention matters more than recruiting. Let's look at a couple pieces of data. So, we'll look at some data why recruiting is going to get harder in the coming decade before it's going to get easier. And then we'll talk a little bit about cost considerations. So, things that matter for your bottom line. And then we'll end on retention and engagement, why it's so important. Here we go. All right. This information comes from the US Census Bureau. Many of you are already going to be aware of this. This is simply stating that next year, in the year 2024, all baby boomers are going to be age 65 or older. 65 or older, all baby boomers. So, what does that mean for your organization in terms of employees you're going to lose to retirement, the institutional knowledge that you're going to lose as these employees retire, and the sort of gap that's going to leave in terms of um, expertise, and how are you going to backfill that? What kind of planning have you and your leadership team been doing for succession planning, right? What kind of succession planning have you been doing for this? Okay. This is the most simple one, right? So, all baby boomers next year are going to be age 65 or older. What does that mean for your business's success? Okay. Next piece of data. Fertility rates have been on the decline, and I'm not going to harp on this one for too long. Obviously, if there's fewer people in the talent pool, there's fewer to choose from, but I want to point out one statistic in particular. So 2026 is what colleges and universities are calling the enrollment cliff. And what they're expecting is for there to be a 15% roughly decrease in the number of high school graduates, and therefore the number of high school grads potentially going to college. Well, why is this? This is 18 years after the 2008-2009 economic downturn. So there was a really sharp decrease in people having babies in those years. So this is translating into what colleges and universities are expecting to be a 15% drop in high school graduates going into college. Well, what does that mean for a business? If we assume that 15% is going to be kind of across the board, a 15% drop in students that are going into each respective major, then what we would expect to see in the year 2030, so 4 years later, is about a 15% drop in graduates from a given program, such as engineering, right? Okay, so already here right off the bat, we're talking about losing employees to retirement, this baby boomer generation that is very quickly aging out of the workforce, right? They want to retire. And also a decrease in the number of students that are going to colleges and universities and coming out with that sort of foundation of knowledge that we're often looking for in the architecture, engineering, and construction spaces. And then finally, the last piece of data I want to point to is some research that was done by a group out of the University of Wisconsin Milwaukee. So, this group, what they did was they looked at women who earned engineering degrees but have left. And they found that almost 40% of women who earned engineering degrees, okay, they have the degrees, they've gone through all of that hard work to earn this credential that we respect so much, right? Almost 40% of these women exit or never bother entering the engineering field, right? We have an attrition problem of losing women to engineering. And what these researchers found is that the majority of these women whom they interviewed reported issues around workplace culture or the culture of the engineering industry at large, right? So we're losing people, we're losing talent in a lot of different ways. And altogether, this is why I think that your retention strategy is should become is becoming much more important than your ability to recruit over the coming decade. Okay, so cost considerations. This will come as no surprise to you if you're a manager or certainly if you're someone in HR that there is a very real and high cost to replacing an employee. SHRM estimates this cost to be 90 to 200% of an employee's salary. And gosh, if you're in recruiting or HR out there and you're seeing something different, I'd love to hear about it. Like, drop us a note in the comments and let us know. I wonder almost because it feels like there's been such a big talent shortage in AEC in recent years, is this number even higher? Okay, so that's your real business bottom line cost to replacing an employee that you've lost. But this does not account for things like the institutional knowledge loss, the disruption to a project when you lose someone who's really key to its day to day activities. And it doesn't account for the sort of employee morale loss that happens when people that are important to the team walk away, right? Okay, so here's what we've talked about: a shrinking talent pool from a bunch of different perspectives. Recruiting is expensive, losing an employee is expensive, and we see other kinds of problems for our business when we lose employees, when we don't have that high retention rate within our organization, productivity and morale loss. So, all of this, I think, equals the summary that retention is absolutely critical. How do you retain employees? Well, the short answer to that is you've got to get employees engaged. Engaged employees equals higher retention. Let's define this for a moment. So, engagement is not about your employee being satisfied with free coffee in the kitchen and a foosball table, right? That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about this internal sense, this internal feeling that employees have that gives them this willingness to freely give discretionary effort to their employer. Okay. Engagement, an employee's willingness to freely give discretionary effort to their employer. Let's talk for just a minute about why that's important. If we use these definitions to kind of break employees' engagement levels into four different categories, we are defining each level of engagement literally by the amount of effort that they put forward. So on the bottom end, we've got the actively disengaged, giving you half a day's effort for a day's pay. And on the other end, the actively engaged are those people who give you a day and a half of effort for a day's pay. These are the people who are most engaged with their work and their employer. So, what this shows us very directly is that actively engaged employees are 3 times more productive than the actively disengaged, right? So, engagement is directly tied to productivity and therefore your bottom line, your profitability. This is so important to understand. And all organizations are going to have employees that fit into all four categories, right? But the companies that are really strong with engagement, they've got more employees that are over to the right. They have a higher percentage of employees that are falling into those top level engaged and actively engaged uh, categories there, right? So it is 100% related to productivity and profitability. And let's look at trends. Like, what are the recent trends for engagement? What you see here is, in short, it's not good. The percentage of employees that are engaged has decreased since the start of the pandemic, and the percentage of employees that are actively disengaged, uh, my friend Don, he calls this employees that have quit and forgot to tell you. Actively disengaged has been on the rise. So this is a real problem that requires attention from you, dear leaders, to think about how are you going to have a strategy for retaining employees in AEC over the next decade? What are you going to do to drive their engagement and get them retained for the long haul? All right. So to summarize here, to thrive in the coming decade, retention should be given dedicated leadership, investment, and attention. Engagement is not about satisfaction and offering employees little perks here and there. Engagement really requires attention to your culture, how team members are treated, how managers are trained to communicate, interact with employees, give feedback to employees, etc. And the path to retention is really a healthy workplace culture that creates the environment for thriving people, i.e., engaged employees. All right. That's what I've got for you today. So, engagement is your path to retention, and retention should be top of mind for you leaders out there, even more so than recruitment. Again, my name is Mel Butcher. You can reach out to me at melbutcher.com. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for